exciting game to show you. I'm playing the white pieces. I start off with my center pawn. He does the same. I go ahead and pull my knight out, attacking his pawn. And he comes down with a knight defending it. I get my light square bishop out of there. I don't want it to get trapped when I push up my d-pawn. Push up the d-pawn, supporting my center pawn. Go ahead and block the b4 square from the knight and the dark square bishop. Develop my dark square bishop. Develop my knight. Develop my queen. So all my pieces are out. He brings his light square bishop down, threatening my knight, and if my light square bishop would have been available, I probably would have brought it back, so that if he captures my knight, I can take it with my bishop instead of my pawn, but I didn't have it and I didn't want to adjust my queen, so I just go ahead and prompted him to take it. He took it, recaptured with my pawn towards the center, which opens up the E file for my rook, or the F file. So I go ahead and I swing the rook over, and I'm watching him to see which way he's going to castle, and I feel a little cramped in, so I go ahead and I push that d-pawn forward. I'm trying to create some space for me with the right side and the king side. I have all these pawns coming down, and my pawn structure is a little broken, so I push that forward, and I don't take. Instead, I just create some space for myself. I'm thinking maybe I get a knight up on a higher square at some point. His knight comes in, and it's a free pawn for me, so I just go ahead and capture, and when he captures this pawn, I take it with my queen, attacking his rook over on h8. He comes down with his bishop and defends. I move the queen down one. His knight attacks my queen. I move over. His queen comes down, putting pressure on my king side. And at this point, it's getting a little dangerous for me, so I go ahead and I castle queen side. I don't like that queen being so close to me, so I move the rook over, trying to drive it away. He falls back, and I want to go ahead and put some pressure on that knight there. I was hoping he would go ahead and take it, and I could capture. But before I captured, if I were to capture with my knight, his dark square bishop could simply go right there, and it would fork my queen against my king. So before I do anything, I need to move my king out of the way. He comes down. I go ahead and pull my light square bishop back, move my king out of the way so I don't get forked. And at that point, I go ahead and I capture. And he recaptures. I slide over. I'm eyeing the c6 square so that I can go ahead and put his king in check. I'm noticing at this point he still hasn't castled yet, which is, he should have castled by now. It kind of leaves him in a weak spot that he didn't. And he's thinking at this point, just trying to torment my queen. So he moves his bishop back up, probably with the intention of dropping the f pawn down, the f6 pawn, so that his queen and his bishop are lined up and they can make an attack against my king. And I go ahead and I make that move now. c6, I put his king in check, and I can't capture the rook in the corner on a8 because he moved the king down, but I can take that pawn and drive his king even further away from his back row, which it basically not driving it into a very safe spot. And I need to find a way to retreat my queen. I'm not looking to exchange. I need my queen as an attacking piece for my my plan to now attack his queen. And I can't come down the file I'm on, so I go ahead and I make my move over to b6, and he drops those pawns. And here I contemplated taking the pawn on b5, but if I had done that, his next move would have been rook over to b8. It would have put pressure downward on my queen, and when I moved my queen out of the way, he would have had a rook, a bishop, and then once he dropped that pawn on f, he would have had his queen, so he would have had a lot of synergy. So I simply left that pawn alone, and I just continued with my attack. So I go ahead and I move my rook on the e file right behind the king, and my thought is I'm going to put pressure on that piece. He go ahead and move the pawn down now, and I need to move my a pawn out of the way again. I don't want to capture, so I go ahead and I move my a pawn up. He swings that rook over, and I get my queen into position. At this point, he's attacking my pawn, and my next move that I wanted to make anyways was to go ahead and get that bishop over to b3, which would protect both pawns, both my a pawn and my c pawn. So now I'm looking at his king, and his bishop's trapped in. So I go ahead and I move that pawn up, and he can't recapture with that pawn because my rook is on the e file. And he goes ahead and goes down, and he's trying to create some momentum for himself and get a rook down here. But it's not a concern for me, so I just go ahead and I capture. He takes with his rook, and then I just drop back a square while I continue with my attack. He moves his rook over to double up, which doesn't do much for him, and at this point I just go ahead with my attack. I take with the pawn, he recaptures, and I don't know if you can see it, but at this point there's a mate in 3. I'll give you a second to look at it. And it's basically at this point just forcing moves. So I go ahead and I capture with my h rook, and the king takes it, and at that point I come in with my queen. I force him back a step. Now if I would have taken the rook and I went over from the rook onto the h file, if you look at the queen and you look at the rook he has, he could have stopped it at h3. So